Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Search with Candour. I'm joined by Mark Williams-Cook. I am Jack Chambers-Ward, and we're breaking down Google I/O that happened earlier this week. If you're watching this next week, it's last week. But we're pretty fresh off of it. I think there's been a lot of hot takes going around, a lot of interesting opinions bouncing around the SEO community on LinkedIn and Blue Sky and articles and all kinds of stuff. We're basically going to pick out a few topics we want to talk about and also answer some questions that people sent to us on social media as well, and basically get into what people are saying, what we're thinking, and I'll even have a follow-up episode next week with an all-star panel. It's going to be a full 5-person panel, essentially.
Panel gaggle.
Very much so. And we're going to break down all of the tracking issues and all AI mode stuff with an awesome group of people next week as well. So get ready for lots of Google I/O and AI mode talk. And I guess I'll kick things off straight over to you, Mark. What's a thing that stood out to you from Google I/O you want to talk about?
AI mode.
Oh, good.
It was the least surprising thing, but it's by far the most important, right? Because it is kind of the future of search in
Totally
a big way.
That way, yeah.
And there's lots to talk about there, but I think the personalization stuff was probably the thing that gave me the most spiraling thoughts about things like you mentioned tracking already. And I know everyone's been worried about clicks. I've seen we've got some questions from LinkedIn about clicks because lots of SEOs report on traffic and clicks.
Funny that, yeah.
Yeah, they don't know who they are without them. So I thought a really nice way. So I was talking about this with John in the office the other day to kind of explain it. And how we talk to clients about it is I was saying to him, if we did a search for something like, running shoes, to use my favorite always example, and you have that as 20,000 searches. At the moment, we've pretty much, give or take, got one SERP. Obviously, there'll be some little variations depending, where you are and whatever. Yeah. But there's pretty much one SERP that 20,000-ish, whatever, people see. And then if you are ranked number one in 10 blue links, you get a fair proportion of that traffic and a small percentage goes on to do the thing you want it to do. And what I was saying to John is once we have personalization, so for instance, we know John is vegan, therefore he's not going to buy running shoes that have leather in them. What we might have is rather than 20,000 people seeing one SERP, we might have, for instance, 1,000 SERPs in a way shown to, and each one's shown to 20 people.
Yeah.
That's quite an extreme example, but there would be no point in showing John results with things he's definitely not going to buy. So if personalization and AI mode can kind of do that for you, you're getting reduced clicks. But as some people have, I would dare say anecdotally at the moment reported, they're getting higher conversions from LLMs. And that, again, I was like, oh, so that's quite a positive thing, right? If, that obviously it makes things easier for the user, but there's quite a lot of hope there for retailers. But then I do think there's a double edge to that, which is I think there's a kind of con there from Google in that having the exposure from a brand building point of view of being visible over the course of, say, 12 months for tens or hundreds of thousands of searches is what builds brand, right? Especially around informational queries, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if Google's now going to gobble them up with refactored AI mode, they're not going to be seeing your brand. I don't really count the tiny citations. That's not, the impression. You're not getting the brand impression as you do going to the site. And I think that's a great play for Google because they're essentially saying, hey, just forget about all the brands. When you need answers, you come to us.
Yeah.
So, and that links into some other things I think they're doing. So I think there's some things we need to think about in terms of how we get those mechanisms to understand exactly what we are. So we're in those personalized results as much as can be. But there's definitely some things that we're measuring that need to change and some maybe other strategies outside of SEO we need to do to fill the hole that's left. So
Yeah,
that was
definitely.
my big thing on personalization. What about you?
Yeah, well, to keep on personalization very briefly as well, like I think it's going to be an era of, because it ties into Docs and Gmail and the whole Google ecosystem stuff, right? Like depending on if you, and I know Sundar was very clear on this, as long as you give it permission, it will tie it all together. It's like, yeah, they're being very careful the way they word this with all the data stuff. But say, like you said, somebody's vegan or somebody has an ethical preference or a color preference or whatever it is. I tend to dress head to toe in black, as if you've ever watched the podcast before, you will probably know. I'm wearing white today. What a surprise. But it will know, like, oh, Jack probably doesn't want a bright blue t-shirt or a bright red t-shirt or whatever. That level of personalization to me is interesting. Like, does it then kind of stop you from thinking outside of the box and going outside of your bubble? Like, oh, maybe John isn't vegan anymore, for example. People come and go from vegetarianism and vegan, and, you know, thoughts and ethics change and all that kind of stuff over the period. So suddenly, oh, actually, I want to try something new and do something different. You try and search for it, and Google's like, sorry, mate, you can't do that.
Well,
like,
maybe
how
it'll
restrictive will it be?
pick up from your searches, and it'll be like, we see you're meat curious.
Yes.
And then you've got your shopping preferences. It's like, do you want to try some bacon?
Yeah, exactly. And then when it comes to like personalized SERP stuff and, like you said, splitting essentially that single SERP into lots of smaller ones, that becomes a much bigger discussion about like persona and understanding your audience on a really like microscopic and macroscopic level. Because I think a lot of us think about people who run as like, oh, it's men age 30 to 40 who run and do this thing and whatever. It's a very like, tends to be a fairly basic kind of thing. And something I talked about with Grace Frolic a few months ago was that whole kind of user journeys and persona kind of stuff that you need to be doing differently. This seems to be even more important now, and how you're writing content for Mark Williams Cook specifically, and how many other people are like you. How do you divide that audience? Are more people like me when they're looking for running shoes compared to you? So how are you tailoring your content to the bigger or wider audience? Or is that kind of where we're seeing like the re-initialization of the whole niche thing of like, now there is Mark's blog of all the favorite running shoes, and it's just picking out, if you're like me, I recommend this, and how kind of niche and personalized that's going to be. I don't know. I'm interested. I'm intrigued. But to not to spoil the topic for next week, how the hell do we track all of this stuff? Like, if every different user essentially is getting a different SERP, what is rank tracking anymore? What does that even mean? It could be rank 8 for me, but 5th for you. So what are the tools doing? What are the third-party tools pulling from? If they're all getting personalized SERPs, who knows, right? Spicy. It's interesting.
I'm maybe pleased that we'll be able to move away from personas, because I got into marketing, 20 odd years ago when I had to sit in meetings and,
draw a little stick figure and like, this is Jim. He wants like...
Yeah, so there was like when I started marketing, that was all going on, and it's like, this is Nina, and she likes watching these films, and like, I went in and I was like, oh, this seems a bit silly, but you all had to pretend it was like really important like stuff, and it wasn't ridiculous, because they never really represent
exactly
people. They're not like, this is Nina, she likes light drug use at the weekends. Like, there's no, it's always just the weirdest, like, and you've probably seen the joke about when they get like Aussie and compare him with like using that system. Anyway, so I think personalization, I think it, with the amount of data they've got, because I've always said that the people that are going to win the like agentic stuff are going to be the people that own the ecosystems and the platforms.
Yep.
So when they know how you're using YouTube and Gmail, or how you're using your phone, that's the keys to making helpful agents. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that's a big conversation when it comes to the agentic side of things, which I'll talk about, because I saw they had mentioned like we can now make purchases for you directly. You can say, hey, Google, go and search for this thing, find a apartment in this area for me and my housemate. We need to move in the next 3 months within this budget, within this area, all this kind of stuff. Then they talked about ticket prices, and this has been a very hot topic over the last couple of years, with what essentially I'm surprised, honestly, there hasn't been more like antitrust stuff against Ticketmaster, but that's a whole other conversation. What we've seen with Google is kind of seems to be what's happening with Ticketmaster. They're buying a lot of the smaller companies and stuff, and they introduce a thing called dynamic pricing, which is the more in demand a ticket is and the more people are clicking on it, the higher the price goes up, because that proves, oh, they really want it, they're willing to pay that bit more. And that's how venues and the fees from Ticketmaster and stuff like that, they get paid. But we're also not seeing that being, carried over to necessarily the artists or the people or the performers or whatever. So when you have a bunch of people using agentic search, how is that different to like scalping bots and stuff, right? And we've seen this many times over the years, but I think because of dynamic pricing and stuff like that, if I say, hey, Google, go and find me tickets for Metallica's show in Glasgow next year, which is a real thing I'm planning to do next week. If I don't give it a budget, will it remind me like, hey, by the way, you didn't set a budget. Are you sure? Or does it just go, cool, I just spent £400 of your money. Like, oh, yeah, you connected to Google Pay, didn't you? You forgot about that. I'm like, okay. But again, because of that ecosystem, because of Google Pay, because of all that stuff, it will probably all connect very seamlessly. But do you then have to be very careful about what you're saying? Buy me new shoes. Is that enough of a prompt to, key in the agent to go and buy something? Or do you need to be more specific? I'm very interested to see how all that stuff works, if it does affect prices. And the other side of things from us as SEOs and like working with a lot of e-commerce clients like we do, what are we seeing in terms of conversion rate, right? What is the conversion rate compared to a human doing this similar kind of search? And coming around to the tracking thing, we'll get in more depth about that next week, but how are we tracking all this stuff? What does an agentic search say it uses an internal search function or something like that? Would that still track in your CRM or in your internal search feature in the same way that a human would? Can you tell the difference? Are the other technologies, websites, even prepared for this kind of stuff? I find that stuff really interesting, and that kind of removing the human element of even doing the search is kind of weird to me. Maybe, again, I'm being a bit old-fashioned, but I get doing the search stuff, but that connecting and actually spending money with that kind of thing kind of freaks me out a little bit when it comes to being aware of budgets and accidentally overspending, and who's responsible for that at the end of the day. Like, oh, you bought this thing and it went over budget. Is that your fault for not giving it a prompt? Or how are they covering fraud and scams and all that? What is stopping, scalpers and stuff to use this technology to then absolutely crush and scalp a bunch of tickets, right?
I saw the demo I saw was with a dress, I think, on Google I/O, and they set a target price.
Yes, yeah.
Which was actually lower than the retail price, which I thought was cool, because it was like the person essentially saying, this is what I'm willing to pay for this.
Yeah.
And I think that then came up with a notification being like, it's lower, you have to press now to buy it. I imagine, we're probably still some way from agentic in terms of it doesn't need further kind of confirmation, and it's just kind of going off and buying stuff for you.
I know people have done that with Apple Pay, like the Hey Siri, buy me a thing, and you set it up, and like your kid hears that, and they start, or the parrot starts repeating it or something. It's like, 500 rolls of toilet paper showed up the other day. It's like, I think the parrot overheard you, or somebody recorded it or whatever, and it's just been playing in the background ever since.
There's potentially really valuable data there for e-com businesses as well. If, for instance, Google's agents are holding kind of the demand price of something, i.e., we know there's 7,000 agents for Metallica tickets that are set at this price, that will buy it at this price, and the range is this, and the median is this, and the mean average
if they're partnered with Ticketmaster, do then Ticketmaster adjust their prices accordingly?
Exactly.
Right?
So that's a really valuable piece of data, because it's kind of like the eBay thing of, the cool thing about eBay is you can see kind of what the market value of something is based on lots of people bidding, instead of like one person being like, it's worth this much. Yeah,
I think we'll find that kind of consensus, because the other side of it is will we ever see that data? Is the other question. Like,
the data's valuable. So
exactly.
Maybe not.
Yeah. Exactly. What's next? What's your second big thought?
So it links in. So with the personalization, which is ads in AI mode. Obviously, it's adjacent to SEO in a way because, again, I think this is such a stealth play by Google in that with AI mode, they've got this two-pronged thing of they're essentially becoming the gatekeepers of information. So it's no longer, oh, if I want information on this topic, here's a great website that I regularly go to. A lot of that is going to gravitate towards AI mode, ChatGPT, Perplexity style interfaces just because there's lower friction. But in terms of, okay, we've got the information, the example they gave in IO was someone doing a search around if you could take small dogs on planes, and it generated the answer, and you got your little citations there, and then they predict the next kind of commercial intent is, oh, you'll want flight ready kind of dog carriers, and then there's massive kind of ads, picture ads from the bottom. And what struck me was currently when you do a search, on a standard SERP, the ads, or rather the organic results, are basically as big as the ads. The ads are first.
Which was a whole discussion a few years ago.
Exactly.
Balancing the SERPs and is this fair, all that kind of stuff, right?
But it's very easy to get to the organic results. You scroll once and you're kind of there generally. And what struck me is now in an AI mode, the organic links are very small citations, without titles, without descriptions.
Yeah,
if they're
no
inline, if they're
no
inline
titles,
links, it's just like a
no
hyperlink.
favicons or anything like that as well. Yeah,
or you get a little block on the right, like with the AIOs. So they're very out the way. But obviously the ads are big picture, prime time real estate. So
that's where the money is, right? Yeah.
To me, it's like, well, it's a risk going from a thing we know that works and generates, $250 billion, whatever revenue a year, to new thing. But if we can kind of stack the deck, so that I think is a big thing for me about, brand recall and where the click goes, because Google talks about like the classic marketing funnel disappearing, and you have to be omnipresent, like real time everywhere.
Yeah.
But they're kind of just trying to squish it down. So they're saying like, okay, you're doing the search, and our data is kind of like, you're probably going to want this product next.
Yeah, definitely. I think that query fan out stuff, and that's a theory and a structure they've been talking about for a while now, definitely feels like the next evolution of a natural search, right? Connecting a certain intent to a following intent, like an informational search, like the dogs on planes thing, to a commercial intent of like, oh, I know you have a small dog, so therefore you can connect it that way. For me, when again thinking about us as SEOs and tracking that kind of thing, being aware of, you then need to think about the kind of structure. If you're an e-commerce site doing informational stuff, there's already conversations I'm sure plenty of people are already having. I know we have this with our e-commerce conversation. It was my tip back in SEO in 2024. In fact, last year was like how informational content can tie into commercial content, and the intent can be mixed in a good way so that you're providing people both the solution to the problem and the answer to the question at the same time. I guess the question is, like you said, when you get ads in there, you might get, oh, somebody ranks well in AI mode, but they're not paying for ads. So you're providing the answer and then they're buying it from somebody else. Exactly. It's like, okay. So then the conversation I was having the other day was about balancing PPC and SEO and all this kind of stuff. Chris Ridley from Evoluted, they've built a tool where if you drop below a certain rank, and you can customize that, they turn on the ads for you. But if you're ranking first, second, and third, for example, you don't pay for ads on that keyword, on those, and they cluster it and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very cool technology. Makes sense to save money if you're already winning organically and all that kind of stuff. With this, maybe depending on how the ranking systems work and how personalized it is and all that kind of stuff, you might actually need to think about doing both to really kind of tackle both informational and commercial intent for the same SERP at the same time. So you're spending twice as much money, budgets go up, all that kind of stuff, and Google's wringing their hands
with money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh no.
Who are you?
Yeah, exactly. And to get onto the query fan out stuff, I thought deep search was an interesting thing to talk about. I know Arnout has talked about it a lot with the deep learn stuff, the learn mode stuff, where it's all these visualizations and cool things where they take educational content, specifically educational, not even informational, but educational content, and you're able to turn it into a mind map and experience videos and 3D models and all this kind of cool stuff. Google is doing visualizations on the SERPs now. I know this is something Mordy talked about specifically on It's New earlier this week, where, of course, it was a baseball thing. So Mordy, the first thing I did was like, I have no idea what this is, Mordy. Were they correct? And Mordy was like, kind of, but it's a basic ass query. Like, you can literally Google that thing right now of this type of bat and this type of person and this type of player, and it's combining 3 queries in one. I don't know. Greg was like, yeah, that's saving me lots of time. That sounds great. You're taking one thing and from 3 things. And I think there's kind of 2 different perspectives there when you think about the deep search side of things. Is like, cool, that's going to save me a lot of time. I don't need to think about asking 3 or 4 different separate queries and, oh, how would I word that in a Google search? And we talk about this all the time, right? Like, I know roughly what to type into Google to find the thing I want. I know 3 different layers of that. It's like, okay, cool. And then if I'm getting a visualization, something, again, I've had many conversations with clients over the years of like, how do you make rich content? You create shareable infographics that people might want to reuse on their own content and repost on socials. And so it's not just a big block of text. You include videos, you include infographics, all this kind of stuff. Especially we talk about a lot with our digital PR team as well, right? Having shareable stuff that can be repurposed. If Google's doing that for you already, does that lessen the value of including rich content in your... But we still need to make valuable, helpful content for users, right? So if you're taking, literally repurposing and revisualizing it, and you can do it in a bar chart or a pie chart. I know you hate pie charts, but in whatever
especially
kind of...
3D.
Oh, when you get the little shadow and the little edge there, it's even worse. But I know they have said it's coming for sports and finance, which is 2 things I don't particularly search for, which is nice. Maybe I don't need to worry about it yet. But for clients, we will definitely need to think about this. And I wonder how that will kind of shift some content strategies. Does that mean just providing a table and let Google do the work and not waste your time? Hey, design team, we need to make this thing and it needs to be branded and in the right colors and blah, 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 blah. I mean, we'll just get a graph on the SERP anyway. Who cares? Like, what difference does it make? I'm intrigued. I'm fascinated. And how quickly will that, because it almost certainly will, expand out of sports and finance into other stuff? How quickly until we get health charts and all that kind of stuff that is tying into YMYL stuff that could be wrong or could be right and misinterpreted? I think there's a huge room for error there and a huge room to eat into the people that have been making helpful content for however long we have.
I think there's Barry Adams made a really great point here about how Google now is actually... Brittany Muller first said when she was looking at Google's mission statement during I/O about them, organizing and making the world's information like accessible. I
Sure.
can't remember the exact words Google uses, but she pointed out, well, you're actually synthesizing it now. And Barry had at the same time, kind of in parallel, said, surely Google should be held accountable now as a producer of content. Because if there are mistakes, there can be repercussions in various industries if I just go and publish, like financial advice or give bad medical advice. And those kind of things are happening from content Google has produced, like you said. So there isn't really, I think, good, solid legislation to tackle that. So I'd be surprised if that doesn't come.
And legislation takes a while to catch up on this stuff. Usually it is a slow-moving beast to catch up with technology stuff.
Especially when you see the kind of questions that you get from some politicians to the tech people.
I just makes my skin crawl, like the infamous Mark Zuckerberg stuff, or the guy, the TikTok CEO being like, are you associated with the Chinese party? No, Senator, I'm Singaporean. Over and over and over and over again. Like,
I've never heard of that place.
Maybe you should be talking about the data and how this works and how, like, Yeah, the people that often are making the laws or making these decisions fundamentally don't understand how the technology works, and often don't even have people in their parties or cabinets or however it works that know about this stuff. And it worries me with this stuff moving so quickly, and we're all always talking about privacy and GDPR and EU regulation stuff. Credit to the EU in many ways. They are often, like the European Commission is often the first kind of big political and legal system to be like, this sounds a bit dodgy. Maybe we shouldn't be giving away all of this information. Maybe you shouldn't be, scooping up all the data and just selling it off. But how quickly until that catches up is a big question.
I think that's a really good point, talking about grabbing information and sort of siphoning it off, to segue into some questions from people, because this is kind of the theme, I think, of some of the questions, right, that we've had.
Definitely. We'll kick off with former guest of the show, the wonderful Nikki Pilkington. Shout out to Nikki. Google is still claiming that AIO are sending more traffic than ever to websites. There was lots of stats about 15% and 100% increase in satisfaction and 10% increase in usage. I'm like, well, yeah, we can't turn them off. So, yeah, sure. Anyway, without offering any proof of this, thank you, Nikki. I'd love to know your thoughts on this and how you're tracking AIO traffic, if you are, and the effect it has on organic traffic to your clients' websites. Any thoughts on them? We'll have a little bit of a follow-up section as well. How are you explaining AIO and any decline on traffic? I know not all clients will have a decline, but how do you kind of open those difficult conversations with clients as well?
Yeah, so I've always thought that the claim AIOs are sending more traffic is quite carefully worded, in that some of these AIOs have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 links in them. And half the time they're back to Google search results. But anyway, that's another thing. So I guess it could be like technically possible, in that if they're counting, for instance, how many clicks all of those links in total in AIOs are getting versus a standard, maybe like featured snippet, because as well, if you are anywhere in an AIO, that's reported as just number one.
That's a good positioning in Search Console.
In Search Console, which is a little bit misleading, because you might have to have an additional click to open the AIO further to even see where you are. So I think the reality is, if you were ranking number one organically in a pre-AIO era, and there is now an AIO, there is a very high chance that you are losing traffic because you are now one of a set of links. But obviously, from a Google point of view, they could say, well, more of the interaction is contained within the AIO than was previously contained in like the top one just SERP position.
Sure, yeah.
Therefore, there are more clicks there. So technically correct is the best kind of correct, is I think the Google
We literally have a book called
here.
Technically Wrong, Technically Correct around here somewhere.
So I think that's the, where Google's arguing that from. In terms of tracking AIOs, there's no good way to do that at the moment. So most of the big tools are doing tracking from logged out searches, and we've seen you get around, from what I've seen at least, from like ZipTie, around twice the amount of AIOs when you are logged in.
Yep. Which
makes sense from a cost point of view from Google. There are sort of tricky ways you can try and track AIOs by looking back at text fragments and jump tos, and kind of I think it was Lily Ray doing kind of reconstructing what kind of prompts could have generated those things.
So going from a query.
But but again, it's like that's not, that compared to what we could and should have, arguably, it's not close to that.
Yeah.
I've been, I think at the moment, in terms of reporting AIO or AI traffic, just getting what we can from analytics, where we've got a little bit more clarity about the source and the impact it's had, has been enough for now. And this kind of links to Nikki's second part of the question, which is how do you talk to clients about declining clicks without it sounding like an excuse? And my advice there for everyone is have the conversation now or early, because it's only an excuse if it comes after the fact. If you tell them
6 months now, you're reporting, we're down.
We're lucky in the UK in that we're going to be able to see the impact of AI mode
because it's not live here yet.
Exactly,
but it probably will be in the next few months.
6 months, probably. Yeah,
I think it was like 3 or 4 months previously with AIOs in the US to us here.
So we've got a little bit of time to communicate that with clients, and I think as well. So it's our most common query now with our inquiries.
Yeah.
So most of our inquiries are basically, "Hi, we're such and such company, and
we're worried
we've
about
lost
AI.
all these clicks over the last 12 months. Can you please fix that for us?" And the conversation is basically, well, this is pretty much happening to everyone.
Yeah.
And it's unlikely there's just a fix. We need to look at the strategy and what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some really good reports we've set up in GA4 that let us do that. We connect that to Looker Studio as well. I know I've used Dana Di Tommaso's template before and to track different LLMs coming through and all that kind of stuff as well. But it's still pretty sketchy, and all depends on the kind of data you even get from GA4. Are people accepting cookies? Blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, right? So there is... It feels like little glimpse. They're letting us have a little nibble, but we're not actually getting the full picture. And that is very much the spicy conversation I'll be having next week with Jono, Chris, Dawn, and Miriam. So
we'll
get into that.
Abundantly clear to me that they just don't want us to have the data because they know it will be a shit show if we get hold of it.
Everything's fine. Everything's great unless you look at the numbers, and everything's screwed.
Because it does. It stinks when it's like it's fine. It's like, well, can you just show me the data then? Nope.
Just trust me.
Trust Daddy Google.
It's Aurora Borealis, located precisely in that room at this time of year.
Lovely Simpsons.
Only in your kitchen. Next up from Anders Fayen. Do you think that PAA questions will mirror prompts in the future? And if so, will AlsoAsk.com, not a sponsor, but we'll pick these up.
So I gave this as a suggestion today, actually, which was one of the things we know that's happening in AI mode is Gemini is branching out, doing a bunch of queries to try and solve your
query fan out stuff.
Your question.
What's likely going to be the next few questions that you ask based on
and how and what questions do I need to ask to answer your whole question? So I think there's two things there. Firstly, also ask, so PAA data at the moment is what I consider to be, I call it intent proximity, right? So we know if someone asks these questions, these are likely follow-up questions, which I think at the moment is probably some of the best data you can get in terms of that linear search journey. So I have a thing in my head, so I gave an example today about how to choose a conveyancer, for instance. That might be a first search, and then it looks at the next search is like, can you negotiate fees with conveyancers? And it's like, these are the next bunch of questions people are going to ask. So that's a very good data source at the moment. I don't think it reflects. So he's asked, will they mirror the prompts in the future? I think the prompts in the future will be more complex in that at the moment, the way Google works is outside of AI mode, you can basically ask it kind of one question at a time.
Yeah.
And you have to, like you said, formulate in your head, what questions do I need to ask? With AI mode, you can be like, I want to find this, and here are a bunch of parameters.
Yep.
And then it will go do the searches. So I think there will be additional, so the queries will be longer, and we will start getting data for how Gemini is fanning out. And I think there's two ways we could possibly do that, which is interrogating the Gemini models ourselves and seeing what it does, running them kind of like locally.
Yeah.
Or I saw this brilliant question asked today of when Gemini does synthetic queries, are our sites going to show up in terms of GSC? Is there going to be impressions?
Right. Yeah. Does that still show up as a query?
Yeah,
right?
because that would be a potential source to look at. And again, then it's like, wow, it would be really helpful if Search Console could show us which it believes a human and which it knows are synthetic queries.
Yeah,
but
good luck with that.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. So in terms of, the core SEO strategy is still, make good stuff for users, answer their questions. At the moment, I still think like PAA data, that kind of data is brilliant, fit for purpose. But yeah, it will evolve like all things do.
Yeah, definitely. Next up, let's hear from Jennifer Otto, and I'll also kind of tie this into the next one as well. How do you think websites whose entire business model depends on informational content, so page views, revenue, all that kind of stuff from ads, should pivot? And to kind of pivot onto that as well, played with AO mode yesterday. This is from Logan X. From a user's perspective, it's great. From a website's perspective, the incentive to click through to a rate isn't so great. What do you think is the future of content sites that target informational content and monetize through ads and affiliate links? Because I think we've seen a lot of those sites be murdered recently, been absolutely trounced and crushed under the boot.
Do you want to go at this one first?
Like, have you not been paying attention for the last 18 months? The helpful content of September, was it 2023? 23, 18 months ago, killed loads of affiliate sites, destroyed a bunch of ad revenue-driven businesses and stuff like that. The example I always use is Brendan from Retro Dodo, like a retro gaming site, talking about emulators and gaming recommendations and all that kind of stuff. His business is completely pivoted. He's now like partnering with a subscription-based search engine and a whole other stuff, and he's very like switched on to it and aware of what's going on. Plenty of other people have been like, well, this doesn't work. I need to pack up my bags and try something different, and just been straight up put out of business. And I think when it comes to the way publishers have been doing it for so long, relying on ad revenue, I think those days are pretty much gone at this point. Having conversations with, and I talked about this in my talk a couple of weeks ago I did for Creative Language Conference, like a lot of the gaming websites that I followed over the years, the IGNs and Games Radars and GameSpots and Giant Bomb and all this kind of stuff, they all either get bought by a conglomerate and then driven into the ground, and a bunch of layoffs and all this kind of stuff, which we're also seeing, of course, in a lot of tech industries, SEO included. And then you find they go, what happened with Giant Bomb recently? It was bought by some of the employees off of the company that now owned it, and it's now just run by them as like a Patreon independent little thing, which is all supported by actual human beings putting money where their mouth is. Like, I really like what those guys do. I've been reading their reviews for 10 years. I know I can trust them. It's personality driven. It's human driven. It's all this kind of stuff. I use my favorite example of Kind of Funny, who are all former IGN employees who left to start their own thing. And they just hit their 10th anniversary a couple of weeks ago. And it was like, they kind of set the standard for so many other publishers now going independent. What we do with Sequelizers is a similar little thing we do with our Patreon as well. We don't make enough money to do it full time. Hello, that's why I'm here. But like, I think there's a lot of movement towards a more independent, condensed, smaller publishing thing, rather than having these massive, like 100-person teams, 200-person teams that rely on huge ads and big banner ads all across the news sites and stuff like that. I think we're going to see a real big squeeze of a lot of those like content sites and publishers, and you're going to have to rethink how you're monetizing your content, basically.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think business model on page views and showing ads, you're pretty much cooked.
Yeah, impression based is
if you're
scary.
doing commoditized content, then there's less friction for someone to get the answer from an AI mode, from a Perplexity, and they don't get the kind of same ads that are intruding on their experience, the cookie pop-ups. It's just nicer for them. So they're going
Have you tried to use a national website, like national news website?
Oh, God, yeah.
Unbearable.
Exactly.
Mail online, all that kind of stuff is just like unusable.
So I think, from a user perspective, they're not going to use those sites anymore because there is a better option for them. And then funnily enough, I was going to mention like Patreon.
Yeah.
So for instance, there's a course creator that I follow that does these programming courses, right? And programming like courses, programming tutorials are a thing that are everywhere online, right?
Yep.
But the issue is they are very kind of like, spotty. There's like a few bits here to do this, and then it's someone else. So this is a person I found who, they had a few like free videos. I found them through YouTube, and I was like, I really like their style. I really like their way of explaining it.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing big like projects that they break down into like, it would be like 40, 50 tutorials to complete this one thing. So you learn the whole set with this one person. And it was kind of like, you do the first 5 or 6, and they're like, the rest are on my Patreon. And
First
it's
taste is free kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like $5 a month or something.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, it's worth paying for.
Yep.
And AI mode is going to struggle to give me that, because it's, this is, in this example, this is video content, and I'm paying because I want it from that person because of how they explain it and what they're doing.
100%.
So, I think that's going to be one of those just evolutions of users doing the thing that's easiest for them.
Yeah.
So how would you pivot? It would be looking at, why would people pay for your content?
Why do you stand out against anyone else? Which is obviously marketing 101 stuff. We talk about it so often. But yeah, I think personality-driven stuff and specific, what is your style? What is your approach to it that makes people care about you for whatever reason?
100%.
Is going to be the way. Next up, another one from Logan X, which we kind of already talked about. Do you think we will eventually get AIO and AI mode data in GSC?
No.
Next question. No. And I know Barry Schwartz, who was at Google I/O, there's been a lot of on-site coverage and stuff. I know at time of recording, Joy Hawkins and Noah Lerner are going to be doing a big breakdown of it as well. So I'll put links for all that stuff in the show notes. There's been some really good. Celeste Gonzalez did a really good breakdown and some stuff as well. Anyway, Barry had asked.
I think it's worth mentioning about the AI mode. So the minute they marked no referrer traffic, we did see John Mueller think that was, I think he called it unexpected. So he's raised it to the team. So there's hope. There's hope.
Yeah. Patrick Stocks from Hrefs pointed out that links from AI mode mark everything as no referrer, so it would come up as direct traffic in your GA4 whether you like it or not. And John Mueller seemed pretty caught off guard by that and was like, I will double check that with the internal team and see what's going on. Maybe that's an unintentional thing. Maybe it's not an unintentional thing. We'll find out, I guess. And yeah, I know Barry has spoken to a few people. Hima Badaraju, who is part of the team that initialized all of that stuff, spoke to them directly and was like, we can't really do anything. And then the conversation next week is going to be a big discussion of, do they owe us that data? Do we have any right to that data? Is it actually beneficial for Google to give us that data? Do Google care about us as little organic people compared to all the money they're making from paid stuff, right? There's a huge conversation, which I'll very much get into with Chris, Dawn, Miriam, and Jono next week. It's going to be spicy, I'm sure. I know a couple of people, we were in a little group chat and they're already disagreeing, so I'm excited already. Next up from Mohammed Junaid Beg, as an agency director yourself, this is to you, Mark, obviously, I'm not an agency director, how can we navigate this time where we must ask execs to focus less on falling traffic, which is likely to fall more, and more on conversions?
I mean, I'd start by asking, do you like traffic or do you like money?
What are your KPIs? What are your metrics that you care about?
So, I mean, money talks, right? And that's generally, I try and have all conversations about SEO starting on the money and working backwards. So like iron out, first question, new clients, how do you make money? Let us understand that. And then we take steps back. So if you start from the how do you make money, and then in a world with AI mode, for instance, how you make money, you step back from that, traffic becomes less important, I think. There's obviously nuance to that, as we've kind of touched on, which then is where you come in with, okay, these are where the gaps are. This is a strategy to address those things longer term, because there is, I think, a longer term negative impact on brand. But yeah, start the conversation from money and work backwards rather than talk about clicks working towards money.
Yeah, definitely. Final question from the Q&A, and we'll get into some other opinions and stuff we've seen on LinkedIn and stuff in a sec. From Mahesh Natani, this really gets me. You get him, Mark. Given that all thinking is outsourced, what happens to our understanding of the user? Will we not lose granular insights related to user behavior? Will it not filter out the human nuance and emotional feedback which we get when they directly interact with us/our websites? Kind of tying into what we're talking about with agentic search there, obviously. If all the thinking is done by LLMs, will we only need to understand how the AI reasons and what kind of tastes LLMs will have?
What an interesting question.
We do need to write for robots after all. It's like, don't create your website for humans. Don't write content for robots. Write it for humans. Like, maybe you need to start writing it for robots after all.
So let's pick some bits out there. Will we not lose granular insights related to user behavior, right? I can't think of two hands worth of examples over the last 20 years where I've met companies that are really using granular level stuff of users well.
Most conversations I have are, oh, I didn't realize we connect that to our CRM, or oh, I didn't realize that was trackable.
Generally, you have enterprise level companies that you are battling tooth and nail to get the most overwhelming technical issues fixed, or you have SMEs maybe somewhere in the middle who have got budget better spent just doing more of things that they know are working, because it comes down to, I think, the level of fidelity of the information, whether we're making personas or whether we're trying to look at quantitative data about how people are behaving, because I'm not sure whether I would say, lots of companies do things like have good A/B testing, for instance, right? Whether it's for SEO or conversion. But to me, that's not what granular, like, user kind of data is. That's more just a kind of farmer's gate. Which way are people gonna flow? So I don't think that's necessarily like a bigger issue. I think you have to adapt to the fact that, and I was talking to someone yesterday, actually, I talked about this in 2016 at Talking Tech, which was the idea that your business, essentially your website, is one window into your database of products and services. It's one way for people to interact with that. And we've had a few other ways kind of since then, with like mobile apps, for instance. They're not using the web, they're using the internet, but they're not using web pages. And I think with these AI searches, with AI mode, with agentic stuff, they're just other dimensions of how people can interact, and they're easier for the user in a lot of ways. So I don't think you need to understand the individual human nuance in those, because the natural thing for a human to do, that most of us do, is have conversations to get information, to exchange information. So we've already made a huge step towards making things easier for people if they can just talk at their computer and get the answers and do the transactions. You don't need to work out if they're interpreting your buttons on your website and your filters correctly, because they're just speaking, which they do every day. So I think actually you're sort of asking, are we going to lose the data to solve a problem that no longer exists, in a way? And yes, I agree. And again, this is something I said before. I think this is where SEO is going, in that we are still optimizing for an agent, because at the moment we're kind of optimizing for an agent in a, we're creating content for users, but we're optimizing for Google's agents, i.e. how they render and, whatever machinery you want to call that.
Yep.
Agentic stuff is just a very smart version of this. So yeah, Miriam, our mutual friend Miriam, has done some brilliant work on talking about how brands are understood by AI and LLMs. And I know she's going to be publishing more about this, which I'll be watching for, because I think that's going to be one of the most important things over the next 5 or 10 years, is how well do the major models, do the major AI services understand what your brand is and what its positioning is, because that's going to determine how they match it up.
Yeah, I think it ties into a big conversation, obviously, going back to the fundamentals of marketing and stuff, right? What makes you stand out? Why do your products better than your competitor's product? And brand has been the buzzword of this year, pretty much. Funny enough, you talk about agentic search there, just like triggered a thing in my brain, thinking back to the Ticketmaster conversation we were having earlier. How do captures work with agentic search? Are you?
I guess
I'm not a robot. It's like, hold on a minute.
Yeah, they're going to
I'll let the robots in, certain robots, like...
Well, there's going to
be... I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, so, I mean, the agentic stuff in Google I.O., they were talking specifically about their shopping graph.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining, we've got these agentic cards. They're going to give them essentially an agentic cat flap into the building. Because that agentic stuff, I don't think is going to work in terms of, how we've seen there's agents that can kind of take control of your web browser, right? That's not going to be scalable for a long time, because there's no parity in how websites are. Like, we make websites humans can't use. So the idea that, agents are going to be interact with them in this way, that we're going to have specialized paths. And again, a lot of the agentic stuff is still LLM at the core. So having points where there is objective, structured data, I think it's going to be needed to reduce errors, because otherwise you're going to have several slices of LLM, and at each stage you've got a chance of hallucination, being added. So the fewer steps you've got there, the easier. So hopefully you shouldn't get captures. A bit like how, when Google's crawling, it shouldn't ideally get captures.
Exactly. A couple of extra thoughts here. Picked out a few from LinkedIn I saw over the last couple of days. One from Ashley Segura here, kind of summarizing a lot of stuff, some recommendations I think kind of line up with what we're saying. Build content people are going to ask for by name, which comes back around to the branding conversation we're talking about. Very much what we discussed. Well, create content worth subscribing to, not just discovering, which is a very, very cool way of putting it.
Subscribe to Core Updates.
There you go, coreupdates.com. Go and check that out. Create assets that build trust outside of the SERP. So a lot of social stuff and other, like you said, the other windows into your brand and stuff like that. Build real reasons for people to choose your site, loyalty, UX, product depth, etc. And of course, focus more on brand, trust, and loyalty, not just keywords. That's a nice little summary there. One I did want to talk about, we haven't really talked about link building and all this kind of stuff, which is always fun. Tamara Novitović from Bazoom brought up lazy links, which I thought was always fun. How link building is going to kind of tie into all of this. And obviously Google has been saying links aren't that important anymore. And that was literally the conversation I had with Tamara back in January of this year. One of the first episodes of this season was, are links still worth it? And that's a conversation that's kind of been echoing throughout. I think when it comes to context and stuff, Tamara kind of summarizes it here quite nicely. Being listed on AIO isn't the same as being clicked. Engaging contextual backlinks that trigger real user behavior are signals that Google and LLMs are watching for. Links now help establish your entity, as we were talking about just now, like how LLMs will understand your brand. So if you want to appear in personalized responses, your brand needs to be connected across credible, relevant sources. So even if you're not directly being linked, you can be linked from other things that are being sourced by LLMs. I know we talked about this internally a little while ago of like accidentally getting backlinks from LLM stuff being referenced in content. And we're like, oh, I've got a bunch of weird, like seemingly like syndicated links and stuff. Like somebody just copied and pasted from their LLM. That's interesting. And Tara finishes off here. We're not building backlinks to rank number one anymore. We're building them to exist.
Oh,
it's very close.
Got it close.
Very close.
I did read that, though. I did read that.
And last one here, I'll go to Sam Torres, who always has very interesting, clever things to talk about. As a marketer, this doesn't really register as something we need to react to and do things differently. To have our brand served in AI mode, we need to have content that answers questions clearly, gives context and support for the claims you're making, and make sure that content is easily understood by both users and bots. Isn't that kind of what we've been doing this whole time anyway?
Yeah, for sure, right? Interestingly, I do know for a fact now that some of the larger LLM companies are buying link graph data.
Oh, interesting.
And kind of domain metrics. So
Ah.
I'm wondering if that's being used during training to decide which sites to kind of lean more heavily into.
Interesting.
To weight their kind of tokens differently.
Very interesting, yeah. Maybe coming back around to a site quality score or something like that we talked about. It feels like so long ago, but often comes up. Yeah, I think how obviously, and we talk about it so often, Google has such an advantage with 20 more years of experience, apart from Bing. I'm sorry, Bing. 20 years more experience than anyone else, and the ecosystem and all the kind of stuff, and just the integration into our lives with Gmail and Docs and YouTube and all kinds of stuff.
Very well placed.
And then you come to the link side of things. They have had page rank and link data and all this kind of stuff for decades longer than everyone else. So how do ChatGPT search and Perplexity and all this kind of stuff delve into that? Very interesting. They're going to have to start.
So maybe here's a thought
data.
Maybe to end with that we can leave people to puzzle over, right? So LLMs on their own aren't particularly useful. in that they hallucinate, and the data has got a hard limit of when it was trained, right? So all of the kind of things like ChatGPT, etc., now use the web to get up-to-date information, and they use it to ground themselves to check this isn't completely bonkers what I'm saying, right? Lots of those services use Google to ground themselves because Google has, as you said, 20 years experience. It's built all these metrics about these URLs are trustworthy or these sites are trustworthy, and they've got a whole bunch of metrics. They do that, right? The two most important things Google has to do that, in my opinion, is link graph data. PageRank will say, it's PageRank plus link
plus
stuff,
plus,
but it's the link graph of the web, right? And user data, clicking on the SERPs and deciding what people like, right? So my thought at the moment was, well, what happens when, imagine everyone started using AI mode, right?
Which we're going to, whether you like it or not.
So that means there's no real updated link graph as to which URLs are good. So they can't kind of follow links around the web to be like, this is popular, because people are just typing stuff into AI mode.
And there's no clicks happening.
They're not linking to anything. And, I share Perplexity result pages with people now instead of web pages, right? So that data's gone. And then they can't relate the kind of click data anymore, because the thing about the SERP is there's fairly good parity. They can control what's happening there, and they've got some nice simple ways they can say, okay, people are clicking on this, they want this. Whereas if it's all personalized, that data's gone. So then my question is, how in a few more years do we successfully ground and retrieve data from the live web? And that's ignoring the question that the incentive to make that kind of content is drying up very quickly. So I will leave that for people to ponder. And if anyone's got any thoughts, DM me on LinkedIn or whatever. I'd love to hear, because to me that's like an unsolved problem, and I don't know if it's something Google has a solution or a plan B for, or whether they're just like, well, we have to do this, so that's a tomorrow problem.
Feels like a lot of Google's recent decisions are Google tomorrow will worry about that.
Yeah, right.
We'll launch it now. Don't worry about it. That's tomorrow's problem. But if you want to ponder about tomorrow's problems, like I said, you can contact Mark on LinkedIn. I'll put links for everything we've mentioned, all the posts and all the resources and stuff in the show notes if you'd want to go and check those out in the video description down below. Please subscribe to coreupdates.com if you want to hear more of our opinions about stuff. I'm sure by the time the same release date as this episode of the podcast will be full of Google I/O stuff and us breaking down all the important bits there as well. And of course, go to alsoask.com if you want to check out more PAA data. And I know you've been working on some cool collaborative studies behind the scenes, some top secret stuff, some extra data.
Well, we've actually, I don't think we've spoken about this on the podcast before, was the, we now track AI overviews in PAA data. Have we mentioned that on the podcast?
No, I've mentioned it off the cuff, but you and I have not spoken about it. So
that's something we've got now.
It gives you a binary like, yes, there is an AI overview or not, right?
Correct. For each question. So we're getting that data now. So hopefully in a few weeks, we'll also be able to release some data on the percentage of AI overviews in PAA blocks over time by country, and track that longer term as well.
Nice. Stay tuned for that. I have, like I said, very cool conversation coming up next week. John O'Alderson, Miriam Jessier, Dawn Anderson, and Chris Green will be joining me talking even more about this and the tracking and all the data and all that kind of stuff.
That's a bomb waiting to go off.
Yes.
That combination of people.
It was very funny. I was had the group chat and Jono was the last person to join. I said, I'm just going to wait for Jono to confirm he's available. And I think Chris's response was like, yes, the mild-mannered Jono Alderson. I'm sure he doesn't have anything to say about it. So we will have plenty to discuss next week. It'll be a big, probably longer than usual 5-person episode, and I'll do my best to keep the panel under control as much as I can. But it's like 4 of the most interesting, smart people in the industry I want to hear from, so I'm really looking forward to that. Of course, plenty of other interviews and episodes. I know you've got a few conferences coming up soon as well, Mark. I'll put links for everything in the show notes. Go and check it out, and thank you so much for watching and listening.
Bye-bye.